Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another beautiful story about Jack and Turten. This is my own take on what might happen next with these two wonderful souls, based on what I've seen in their journey so far. You know what's beautiful about love? It's not always the grand gestures. Sometimes it's a man coming home early just to cook dinner. Sometimes it's a woman who'd rather watch her husband work than rest her tired feet. That's the kind of love we're going to talk about today. Let me set the scene for you. Jack and Turten have been building something extraordinary up on that quiet hillside. A small house, a garden full of rambutan and rose apples, a pond where lotus and water lilies are just beginning to bloom. They have 3 dogs and a cat. They have each other. And now they have a dream that's getting bigger every single day. The dream of a real farm. Not just a garden anymore, a farm. With fences and ponds and animals and rows of crops stretching toward the morning sun. What I love about Jack is how he loves quietly. He doesn't announce it. He just comes home early one day, slips into the kitchen, and starts cooking salted chicken because he remembers Turten likes it. That's not nothing. That's everything. A man who pays attention is a man who loves. And Turten knows it. You can see it in her eyes. Picture this. Turten has just spent the whole afternoon at the market, sitting on a small plastic chair, selling rambutan she harvested with her own hands. 15,000 a kilo. Sometimes less if the customer buys the whole basket. She's tired. Her arms ache. The sun has been merciless. But when she sells that last bag and counts the small bills in her palm, she smiles. Because every coin is a brick in the dream they're building together. She calls Jack on the way home. I'm almost there. And Jack, who's already in the kitchen with an apron tied around his waist, smiles too. Take your time. I'm cooking dinner. And here's the thing. He didn't have to. He could have rested. He could have waited. But he chose to give, because that's what love does. It chooses, over and over again, every single day. When Turten walks through the door, the smell of mushroom soup wraps around her like a warm blanket. She sees the table. She sees him. And in that moment, she forgets the heat, the long bus ride, the aching shoulders. This is home. This is everything she ever wanted. But here's what nobody saw coming. While they were eating, sharing tofu and mulberry mushroom soup, Jack put down his chopsticks and looked at her with a strange softness in his eyes. Turten, he said quietly, I've been thinking. It's time. Time for what? Time for the dream. Time to stop talking about the farm and actually start building it. Turten blinked. Her heart skipped. They'd been planning this for months, saving every dong from the market, drawing little maps on napkins, dreaming about chickens and ducks and a proper vegetable field. And now Jack was saying the words out loud. Let's do it. Let's start the farm. Turten's eyes filled with tears. Not sad tears, the other kind. The kind that come when a long-held wish finally steps into the light. But there was one thing standing in the way. One person they couldn't leave behind. Mr. Phuong. The old man who'd helped them buy this land in the first place. The kind soul who lived alone now, sleeping in friends' houses, carrying his life in a backpack. They couldn't just pack up and go down to the new farm without making sure he was safe and settled first. That's not who Jack and Turten are. So tonight, sitting at that little wooden table with mushroom soup growing cold, they made a promise. Tomorrow, they would find Mr. Phuong. Tomorrow, they would bring him home. And once he was settled in their old house, then, and only then, would they take their first real step toward the farm of their dreams. But that's just the beginning, my friends. Because what happened the next morning when Jack picked up that phone to call Mr. Phuong, well, it changed everything in the most beautiful way. Last we left off with Jack and Turten making a promise. Find Mr. Phuong. Bring him home. Then start the farm together. Simple plan, right? But love is never quite that simple. And sometimes, the most beautiful things happen exactly when you stop trying to control them. The next morning came with a sky so blue, it looked painted. Jack woke up early, made a pot of tea, and stepped outside to call Mr. Phuong. His thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment. He was nervous, you could tell. because asking a proud old man to accept help is one of the hardest things in this world. Old men have their dignity, and Mr. Phuong had more than most. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. And then, a tired voice answered. "Hello?" Jack swallowed. "Mr. Phuong, it's Jack. I'm calling about what we talked about yesterday." There was a long silence on the other end. So long that Jack thought maybe the line had dropped. But then, very softly, Mr. Phuong said, "I've been thinking about it all night, son." Jack held his breath. Turten, watching from the doorway with 2 cups of tea in her hands, held hers too. And then Mr. Phuong said the words that changed everything. "If you and Turten still want me, I'd like to come home today." Home. He used the word home, not come stay or come visit. Home. Turten heard it through the phone and her hand flew to her mouth. Tea splashed onto the wooden floor. She didn't even notice, because something sacred had just happened. An old man, alone in the world, had just chosen them as family. Here's what touches me about this. Mr. Phuong isn't blood. He isn't a relative. He's just a kind soul who helped 2 young people buy a piece of land, and now they're returning that kindness 100 times over. That's family. Real family. The kind you choose. The kind that gets built one act of love at a time. Jack hung up the phone and turned to Turten. They didn't need words. She set down the tea, walked across the porch, and wrapped her arms around him. They stood there for a long moment in the morning light. 2 young people holding each other, knowing that today their little family was about to grow. But Tien, being Tien, immediately switched into action mode. "We need to prepare his room," she said. "Fresh sheets, the good pillow, and I'll cook something special for lunch. He likes braised fish, doesn't he, with pickled vegetables on the side?" Jack laughed. "You remember everything, don't you?" "Of course I remember," she said softly. "He's family now." They spent the whole morning getting ready. Turten swept the spare room until the wooden floor shined. She cut fresh flowers from the garden, lotus and water lilies, and arranged them in a small jar on the bedside table. She washed the curtains. She made the bed 3 times until the corners were perfect. Because when you welcome someone into your home, every small detail is a way of saying you matter. Jack, meanwhile, went to the market. He bought fresh fish. He bought Mr. Phuong's favorite tea. He even bought a small box of mooncakes, because Mr. Phuong had once mentioned, in passing, that mooncakes reminded him of his late wife. Jack remembered, just like he remembered Turten loved salted chicken. That's the kind of man Jack is. He listens, he remembers, he loves. And then, something beautiful happened. Around noon, Jack's mother called. She was coming home earlier than expected, just a day or 2. And when she heard Mr. Phuong was moving in, she cried happy tears on the phone. "Oh, that's wonderful," she said. "That dear man deserves a family. And our family just got bigger. The whole house, the whole hillside, the whole world felt warmer that morning. 3 dogs were running through the yard. The cat was sleeping in a patch of sunlight. The lotus buds were just beginning to open. And somewhere down the mountain road, an old man was packing a small bag, ready to come home to people who finally wanted him. But the most beautiful moment of this whole day hadn't even happened yet. The afternoon sun was beginning to soften when they heard the motorbike coming up the dirt road. Turten rushed to the gate, wiping her hands on her apron. Jack stood beside her, his heart beating just a little faster than usual. And then, around the bend, there he was. Mr. Phuong, sitting behind his old friend on a battered motorbike, holding the same small backpack he always carried, his whole life, in one bag. When he climbed off and saw Turten waiting at the gate with that bright smile of hers, his old eyes filled with tears. He tried to hide it. Old men always try to hide it. But Turten saw, and she did the most beautiful thing. She didn't make a fuss. She didn't make him feel awkward. She just walked up, took his backpack gently from his hand, and said, "Welcome home back, Phuong. Lunch is almost ready." That was it. Just those simple words. Welcome home. But for an old man who'd been sleeping in borrowed beds for months, Those two words were the whole world. Jack stepped forward and helped his old friend inside. The smell of braised fish filled the kitchen. The little jar of lotus flowers sat on the bedside table. Mr. Phuong walked into the room they'd prepared for him and just stood there, looking around, his hand resting on the freshly made bed. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was thick. "I don't know how to thank you both." "Him?" Turten smiled. "Then don't back. Just stay. Just eat well. Just be happy here." And Jack added, "This is your home for as long as you want it. No conditions, no rent, no timeline, just family." They sat down to lunch together. 3 people at a table that had only ever held 2. And something shifted in the air, my friends. Something good. Mr. Phuong ate slowly, savoring every bite, occasionally looking up at the young couple across from him with wonder in his eyes. He'd given them a small kindness once, and now they were giving him back a whole life. After lunch, while Mr. Phuong rested in his new room, Jack and Turten sat on the porch swing together. The afternoon was golden. The dogs were sleeping in the shade. And for the first time, the dream of the farm felt real. Not someday, not maybe, soon, very soon. "We can leave next week," Jack said quietly. "Back Phuong will be settled. Mum will be home. The garden will be in good hands." Turten leaned her head on his shoulder. "Next week," she repeated, like a prayer. "Our farm, our dream, our life." This is the part that gives me hope, my friends, because we live in a world that often forgets old people, that often forgets quiet love, that often forgets the small daily acts of kindness that hold families together. But Jack and Turten haven't forgotten. They remember everything that matters. And as the sun began to set over the hills that evening, Jack pulled out a notebook and started sketching. The farm, the pond, the chicken coop, the vegetable rows. Turten leaned over his shoulder, pointing, suggesting, dreaming out loud. 2 young people, 1 old notebook, 1 impossible dream that suddenly didn't feel impossible at all. Because when love is real, when family is built on kindness, when you take care of the people who took care of you, the universe has a way of opening doors you never even knew were there. But the most beautiful moment is still ahead. Because tomorrow, when Jack and Turten take their first real step toward that farm, something wonderful is waiting for them. Something they never expected. Something that will make every long day at the market, every hot afternoon in the garden, every quiet sacrifice finally make perfect sense. What I think comes next will warm your heart in ways you can't imagine yet.